He told me pain made me beautiful, and I believed him. The narcissist wrapped my suffering in poetry. Every tear, every breakdown, every moment I collapsed under his silence. He called it passion. He said it proved how much I loved him. And I clung to those words like they were truth, not realizing I was becoming his victim, trapped in a toxic relationship built on emotional abuse and manipulation. At first, it looked like love. He kissed me like I was salvation. He whispered, "No one else understands me like you do." But slowly, the mask slipped. The affection only came after chaos. The tenderness only after he had broken me. When I was happy, he grew distant. When I was strong, he disappeared. But when I cried, when I begged, when I fell to pieces in front of him, that's when the narcissist came alive. There was a night in the kitchen I can't forget. I had spent the whole day trying to please him, cooking his favorite meal, wearing the dress he once said he loved. He walked in, glanced at the table, and muttered, "You really try too hard." Hours later, after ignoring me completely, he found me crying by the sink. Suddenly, his arms were around me. He kissed my hair, whispering, "This is the real you. This is when I know you love me." And I hated myself for melting into him. That was his control, his manipulation. He didn't want my joy. He wanted my pain. My suffering was his proof of ownership. My trauma was his masterpiece. He turned me into a shadow of myself, feeding on my heartbreak like it was devotion. That is the essence of narcissistic abuse. Love only exists when it hurts. With a narcissist, your happiness is a threat, but your pain is their paradise. The cruelest part of emotional abuse is realizing they never loved you, only the broken version of you they created. I became addicted to his cycles, the gaslighting, the silent treatment, the small crumbs of affection that only arrived after I shattered. He taught me that survival meant suffering, that being his victim was the only way to keep his love. And I believed him, until there was nothing left of me to give. Even now, I sometimes crave the comfort he offered after the storm he caused. That's the trauma bond, the toxic thread that ties you to the very person who destroys you. It whispers that the pain was passion, that the chaos was connection, that maybe the narcissist really did love you in his own twisted way. But deep down, I know the truth. He only loved me when I was suffering, and that was never love at all. The silence he left behind is louder than his presence ever was. He didn't just love me when I was suffering. He needed me to suffer. The narcissist thrived on my weakness like it was oxygen. When I smiled, when I felt free, when I dared to be light, he vanished. Cold eyes, silent treatment, a wall of indifference that cut deeper than any scream. But the moment I broke down, when the tears slid down my face and I whispered apologies I didn't even understand, suddenly, he was there, tender, attentive, almost angelic, and I mistook that pattern for love. That's the trap of narcissistic abuse. It isn't the anger that keeps you bound. It's the relief, the cycle of punishment and reward. He would starve me of affection until my soul went numb, then feed me a single crumb of warmth, and I would fall to my knees in gratitude, like a victim crawling back to their captor, thanking them for loosening the chains they put there in the first place. One night, after 3 days of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him paragraph after paragraph, begging for a reply. Nothing. At midnight, I gave up. I curled into bed, shivering with loneliness, convinced I had ruined everything. At 3:12 a.m., my phone lit up. "I love you, baby. No one will ever love me like you do." And I cried as if he had given me the world. But really, he had given me the bare minimum. Affection as ransom. A hostage negotiation where my heart was the prisoner. I started to associate pain with closeness. If he ignored me, it meant I had to work harder. If he lied, it meant I had to forgive quicker. If he humiliated me, it meant I had to prove I was strong enough to endure. He conditioned me to believe that love was measured in suffering. And the more I bled, the more real our connection was. That's how the narcissist rewrites your reality. Through gaslighting, through manipulation, through endless cycles of cruelty disguised as intimacy. He convinced me that my suffering was beautiful, that my breakdowns were proof of devotion. And I believed it because the alternative, admitting I was just a victim in a toxic relationship, felt too unbearable. I can still see his face the night he told me, "You're only soft when you're broken. That's why I love you." I laughed, nervously, pretending it was a joke, but he didn't laugh back. He meant it, and I should have run that night. But instead, I kissed him harder, desperate to make him love me in all my forms, desperate to show him I could be enough even without pain. But narcissists don't want partners. They want mirrors. They want victims who reflect their control, their power, their ability to bend another soul into submission. And I was perfect prey, too empathetic, too forgiving, too hopeful. My trauma became his playground. The psychological abuse spread into every corner of my life. I stopped talking to friends because he called them distractions. I stopped wearing my favorite clothes because he said they made me look like I was asking for attention. I stopped dreaming of the future because he told me I was naive. Piece by piece, I abandoned myself, thinking that would finally make him stay. But the more I lost myself, the more he lost interest, until I was nothing but a shadow, crawling after his approval. There was one moment that still haunts me. We were at a family dinner. Everyone was laughing, eating, clinking glasses. I told a small story, something harmless, something light. He cut me off mid-sentence, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "God, you always exaggerate. You sound ridiculous." The table went quiet. My cheeks burned. I wanted to disappear. Later, in the car, I tried to tell him how much it hurt. He rolled his eyes and whispered, "You're too sensitive. I was just joking. Why do you always ruin everything?" That's how gaslighting works. The wound becomes your fault. The humiliation becomes your weakness. And slowly, you stop trusting your own memory, your own feelings, your own voice. You become your own silencer. That is the deepest form of control a narcissist has. When you no longer need his abuse to keep yourself down because you've learned to do it alone. There is no love in narcissistic abuse. Only hunger. Only control. Only the illusion of intimacy built on suffering. He didn't fall in love with me. He fell in love with the way I collapsed at his feet. Even now, I sometimes crave the comfort that followed the chaos. The late-night whispers after the silent treatment. The sudden tenderness after days of cruelty. My body still remembers the rush of relief, the dopamine hit of being loved after being starved. That's the trauma bond, a toxic tether that ties you to the very person who destroys you. It's not love, it's addiction. But addiction feels like love when you're inside it. Healing has been like learning a new language, reteaching my heart that love isn't supposed to hurt, retraining my nervous system to recognize safety, not silence, as comfort, rebuilding trust in myself after years of being told my instincts were wrong. Some days, I still fail. Some nights, I still reach for my phone, half expecting his name to appear, and when it doesn't, I feel both relief and grief. Because as much as he broke me, there is a part of me that still misses being broken for him. That's the cruelty of it all. That's the scar abuse leaves behind. But I know this now. The narcissist never loved me. He loved my suffering, and I refuse to bleed for anyone again. Still, sometimes, in the quiet, I wonder, if he ever looks back, will he remember my love, or only the control he lost when I finally walked away? And that question lingers like a shadow, because healing doesn't erase the echoes. It just teaches you how to live with them. He trained me to believe that silence was safer than truth. Every time I tried to confront him, to say, "This hurts me," or "I need more from you," his face would harden. His eyes would glaze over. Sometimes he would leave the room without a word. Sometimes he would laugh in my face. But the worst punishment of all was the silent treatment. Hours, days, even weeks of nothing. No texts, no calls, just absence. An absence so loud it screamed. And every time, I broke first. I always broke first. I sent the apology. I begged for forgiveness for sins I didn't commit. "I'm sorry if I upset you. I'll do better." I wrote those words over and over until they became my mantra. Until I started believing I was the problem, not him. That is the poison of narcissistic abuse. It convinces the victim that their suffering is their fault. One night, after 5 days of silence, I showed up at his apartment. My hands trembled as I knocked. He opened the door, leaned against the frame, and stared at me like I was an annoyance. My voice cracked when I whispered, "Can we please just talk?" He sighed, stepped aside, and let me in. But he didn't say a word. Not one. I sat on the couch, tears streaming down my face, while he scrolled through his phone. And only when I was sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe did he finally put the phone down, come sit beside me and murmur, "Now you're being real. Now I know you care." He fed on my collapse. He fed on my destruction. And I started to believe that falling apart was the only way to be loved. The manipulation was subtle, but it bled into everything. If I laughed too much around others, he accused me of flirting. If I dressed nicely, he asked who I was trying to impress. If I spoke about my dreams, he called me childish. Piece by piece, he chipped away at every part of me that made me whole, until the only version of myself I knew was the one defined by him. And yet, I kept holding on. I told myself that every cruel word, every rejection, every long stretch of coldness was just a test, that if I proved I could endure, if I showed him unconditional loyalty, one day he'd see. One day he'd love me fully, not just in fragments. That's how the trauma bond kept me chained. Hope mixed with pain. Love tangled with control. I can still hear his voice. "You're too emotional. That's why people leave you. You're lucky I'm still here." And I nodded. I agreed. I thanked him for not abandoning me, even as he abandoned me in every possible way except physically walking out the door. The narcissist doesn't need to raise his hand to hurt you. His silence cuts deeper than any slap. I thought his distance meant he was protecting himself, but really it was how he controlled me. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. My smile looked foreign, my eyes hollow. Friends noticed. "You've changed," they said. I brushed it off, insisting I was just tired, just stressed. But deep down I knew I wasn't tired. I was disappearing. Because in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, survival means self-erasure, and I was erasing myself day by day, piece by piece, all for the illusion of love. He always chose the perfect moments to remind me that I belonged to him, not through affection, but through humiliation. I remember the night we went to a friend's party. I had dressed carefully, hoping to look nice for him, hoping he'd notice me the way he used to in the beginning. As soon as we arrived, he pulled his hand away from mine. He laughed with others, told stories, charmed everyone in the room, and I stood at the edge of the crowd like a stranger. When I tried to join in, he interrupted me, smirking. "Don't listen to her. She exaggerates everything." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, my cheeks burning, but inside, I was collapsing. On the way home, I asked why he embarrassed me like that. He looked at me coldly and said, "You're too sensitive. Stop making everything about you." And then silence. Days of silence. That was his weapon. Silent treatment so sharp it sliced through my soul. My phone stayed empty. My heart stayed restless. And when I finally broke down and apologized for being hurt, for daring to confront him, only then did he return. And his return felt like oxygen after drowning. He would stroke my hair and whisper, "See, we're stronger after every fight." But those weren't fights. They were punishments. They were training. He conditioned me to associate love with suffering. If I was quiet, if I bent, if I broke, he rewarded me. If I resisted, if I asked for more, if I tried to stand tall, he withdrew. It was psychological abuse at its most insidious, not screaming, not hitting, but teaching me to destroy myself for him. One morning, I woke up to see him scrolling through his phone, smiling. I asked who he was talking to. His smile vanished. "Why are you always suspicious? You're so insecure. No wonder people get tired of you." My stomach turned. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe I was paranoid. Hours later, when I found a message from another woman, he accused me of invading his privacy. He twisted it so well I ended up apologizing. Me, the victim, begging forgiveness for catching his lies. That was gaslighting at its purest. And still, I stayed. Because every time I reached my breaking point, he pulled me back with crumbs of affection. A flower on the table. A sudden kiss in the middle of an argument. A text that said, "You're the only one who will ever love me this way." Those moments hooked me deeper. They made me believe that the suffering was worth it. That maybe all the pain was leading to something greater. But it wasn't love. It was control. I can't forget the night in his car. We were parked outside my apartment after another fight that I didn't even start. I was crying quietly, begging him to just talk to me. He stared straight ahead, hands tight on the wheel, His jaw clenched. The silence stretched so long I thought I would choke on it. Finally, he turned to me and said, "You make me want to leave you every day. But then I remember, no one else will put up with you." And he started the engine, leaving me shaking, too weak to even walk upstairs. That sentence became my prison. No one else will put up with you. I carried it into every moment, into my friendships, my family, my work. I believed I was too much, too broken, too difficult. And he was the only one patient enough to endure me. That's the power of emotional abuse. It rewrites the story of who you are until you can't recognize yourself. The narcissist doesn't chain you with his hands. He chains you with your own doubt. I wasn't his partner. I was his puppet, dancing to the rhythm of his silence. Even intimacy became a battlefield. Some nights, he pulled me close, desperate, intense, as if I was his lifeline. Other nights, he turned his back, untouched, leaving me cold and unwanted. When I asked why, he muttered, "You don't deserve me when you act this way." And I believed him. I started questioning my worth, my body, my very right to be loved. There were mornings when I woke up beside him and felt like a ghost. My laughter, my confidence, my fire, all gone. I tiptoed through my own life, afraid to trigger his next punishment. I became a shell, living only to please him, to avoid abandonment, to keep him from slipping through my fingers. And yet, every time I collapsed, he smiled. He kissed my tears, held me like I was fragile glass, and he whispered the words that kept me chained. "This is when I love you most, when you need me." And that was the truth of our toxic relationship. The narcissist only loved me when I was suffering, and every day I gave him more pieces of myself to keep that love alive. He saved his worst cruelty for when other people were watching. One evening we went to dinner with his colleagues. I was nervous. I wanted to look perfect, speak carefully, make him proud. Before we left, I asked if my dress looked okay. He glanced at me, smirked, and muttered, "It doesn't matter. No one's looking at you anyway." My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. I told myself he was stressed, that he didn't mean it. That's how a victim of narcissistic abuse survives, by turning daggers into excuses. At the restaurant, I tried to join the conversation. Every time I spoke, he interrupted. Every story I told, he corrected. When I laughed, he rolled his eyes, and when I grew quiet, he leaned toward one of his coworkers and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "She gets emotional when she doesn't get attention. Just ignore her." The table laughed. My throat burned as I forced a smile. Inside, I wanted to disappear beneath the floor. In that moment, I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even a person. I was a prop for his performance, a punching bag dressed in a smile. And yet on the ride home, when I finally whispered, "Why would you say that in front of them?" he sneered, "Stop being dramatic. You embarrassed yourself, not me." That's gaslighting. That's control. That's the cruelty of a narcissist. They break you in public, then make you believe you held the hammer. And still, I stayed. Because later that night, when I cried silently into the pillow, he reached over, stroked my hair, and whispered, "You're beautiful when you're broken. Don't you see? No one else would love you this way." And I clung to him, desperate for warmth, even as his words pierced me deeper than silence ever could. That's when I realized his love wasn't love at all. It was ownership. A toxic relationship where my worth was measured in how much pain I could endure. He didn't love me when I laughed, when I dreamed, when I shined. He only loved me when I was suffering, when I was small, when I was silent. And I kept shrinking, because being loved in pieces felt safer than not being loved at all. The narcissist doesn't just humiliate you. He convinces you that humiliation is love. I thought I was strong because I stayed. Now I know strength would have been leaving the first time he made me cry. The trauma seeped into everything. I stopped meeting friends because I feared he'd accuse me of betrayal. I stopped telling my family the truth because I didn't want to hear their disappointment. I stopped dreaming of a future because my present consumed every breath. My world became smaller, darker, quieter, until the only sound left was his voice. And that voice still echoes. Even now, when I walk into a crowded room, I hear his laughter in my mind, mocking me. When someone compliments me, I wait for the insult to follow. When silence lingers in a conversation, I feel my stomach twist with fear. That's the aftertaste of psychological abuse. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves scars in your perception of reality. One night stands out more than the rest. A night I still can't shake. We were at a family gathering, sitting around a long table. Someone asked how we met. I smiled, ready to tell the story of our beginning. But before I could speak, he cut in. She chased me. She was obsessed. I felt sorry for her, so I gave her a chance. The room erupted in laughter. I laughed too, the kind of laugh that hides tears. Later, when I asked why he humiliated me, he said, "It's true, isn't it? Don't make everything so serious." That was the climax of my breaking. Public humiliation so sharp I felt myself split inside. And yet, even then, I stayed quiet, because walking away felt more terrifying than being destroyed in plain sight. That's the most dangerous part of narcissistic abuse. You stop fearing the abuser and start fearing life without them. I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving, breathing in his cruelty, breathing out apologies that didn't belong to me. And still, somewhere deep inside, a voice kept whispering, "This isn't love. This is control. This is abuse." But that whisper was faint, drowned beneath his laughter, his silence, his lies. And I wonder if I'll ever hear my own voice louder than his again. The collapse didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, in whispers, in shadows, in the way I started avoiding mirrors because I couldn't recognize myself anymore. My voice was quieter. My body was heavier. My eyes were empty. I moved through the world like a ghost, living only to anticipate his moods, his silences, his punishments. But then came the night my body gave out. We were at home. I had spent the whole day cooking, cleaning, doing everything I thought might keep him from being angry. When he walked through the door, he didn't say hello. He dropped his bag, looked at me once and muttered, "You're so pathetic." Something inside me shattered. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to ask why, but no words came. My throat locked. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I slid down to the floor, shaking, sobbing so hard I thought I would choke. I remember the cold tiles pressing against my skin, the taste of salt in my mouth, the sound of my own gasps echoing through the kitchen. And him? He stood there, watching, unmoved, detached, almost curious. When I begged, "Please, just say something," he smirked and whispered, "This is why you'll never survive without me." That was my breaking point, my collapse. The moment I realized I wasn't living anymore. I was dying slowly, piece by piece, under the weight of his control. The narcissist doesn't destroy you in one blow. He drains you until you collapse, and then calls it weakness. My silence that night wasn't peace. It was the sound of a woman disappearing. After that, I couldn't hide it anymore. My body carried the trauma in every step, every breath. Friends asked what was wrong. Family looked at me with worry I couldn't explain, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you put into words that the person you love most is the one who's killing you from the inside out? I started waking up with panic attacks, trembling in the dark. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped existing outside of his orbit. My world had shrunk to one person, a narcissist who fed on my suffering and called it devotion. And yet, even after the collapse, even after the tears and the begging and the humiliation, I still waited for him to love me. I still prayed that maybe, just maybe, my breaking would finally make him gentle, that maybe he'd see how much I gave, how much I sacrificed, how much of myself I destroyed, and choose to save me instead of watching me drown. But he never did. He only smiled. He only fed on the pieces I lost. That's the truth no one tells you about narcissistic abuse. It doesn't end with a fight, or a goodbye, or a door slamming. It ends when there's nothing left of you to break. And that night, on the kitchen floor, gasping for air as he stood above me, I knew I was already gone. After the collapse, nothing felt real anymore. I went through the motions of life, but I wasn't living. I smiled when people spoke to me, but it felt borrowed, rehearsed, hollow. My body carried the trauma like armor I couldn't take off. My chest was tight, my stomach knotted, my skin hypersensitive to every tone of voice, every pause in conversation. Even silence, especially silence, became unbearable, because silence was his language, his weapon, his cage. Even after he was gone, I felt him everywhere. In the hesitation before I sent a text, terrified it might be too much. In the way I apologized before speaking, as though my words were dangerous. In the way I avoided eye contact, afraid someone might see how broken I truly was. That's what narcissistic abuse does. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves echoes that outlive the relationship itself. The first nights without him were the hardest. My phone stayed dark, and that darkness felt heavier than any insult he had ever thrown. I lay awake, staring at the screen, waiting for his name to appear. Sometimes I prayed he'd call, just to remind me I still existed. Sometimes I prayed he wouldn't, terrified that if he came back, I'd fall to my knees all over again. That's the cruelty of trauma bonds. You don't just miss the person, you miss the pain. You miss the highs that came after the lows, the tiny crumbs of affection that felt like a feast after weeks of starvation. My body craved him like an addiction, even as my soul begged me to stay away. I tried to rebuild. Therapy, journals, long walks alone. I wrote letters I never sent, pages filled with questions he would never answer. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me? Or did you just love my suffering? The silence that followed those questions was deafening. I stopped wearing red lipstick because it reminded me of the night he called me cheap for smiling too brightly. I stopped dancing because it felt like betrayal to enjoy something without him. I stopped dreaming about the future because I couldn't imagine one that didn't include his shadow. And yet, sometimes, I swore I could feel him watching me, not physically, but in the corners of my mind, in the way I checked my phone before sleeping, in the way I woke up panicked, certain I'd done something wrong. The narcissist doesn't need to stay to control you. His voice moves in, takes root, and whispers until you confuse his cruelty for your conscience. There is life after abuse, but first you have to survive the echoes. The narcissist leaves your home, but he never leaves your head. The strangest part? People celebrated when I finally walked away. You're free now, they said. You should be happy. But freedom felt like emptiness, like standing in a vast, cold field with no one around. At least when I was with him, I had a purpose, even if it was survival. Without him, I didn't know who I was anymore, because he hadn't just broken my heart, he had stolen my reflection. And in the aftermath, I was left staring at a stranger in the mirror, asking the same question over and over again. Who am I, if I'm not his victim? Then came the silence that was truly mine, not the narcissist's silence, the one that punished, that froze, that hollowed me out. This was different. It was emptier, but it was mine. And yet, even in my own quiet, I could still hear him. His words replayed like broken records. You're pathetic. No one else will love you. You're only beautiful when you're broken. Some days I believed him. Some nights I still do. I move through the world like someone relearning how to walk. Every step feels strange. Every laugh feels borrowed. Every tear feels like proof that he's still here somehow, inside me. The narcissistic abuse ended when he left, but the trauma stayed. His control lingers in my habits. His manipulation whispers in my doubts. His shadow hovers in my reflection. Friends tell me I'm stronger now, but strength feels like a costume I wear in public. At night, alone, I peel it off and sit with the victim I still am. The victim who craves his approval. The victim who still wants him to see what he destroyed. The victim who still waits for an apology that will never come. And maybe that's the final cruelty of a toxic relationship with a narcissist. You escape the person, but not the echo. He didn't just break me. He taught me how to break myself, and I'm still unlearning it. Some nights I don't miss him. I miss the version of me who still believed love could save him. I wish I could tell you this story ends with healing, with freedom, with a new beginning. But the truth is harsher. Healing is not a door that opens once. It's a hallway of mirrors, and in each one, I still see pieces of him staring back at me. Maybe one day the echoes will fade. Maybe one day I'll look in the mirror and see only myself again. But tonight, I still hear his voice, and I still wonder if I'll ever silence it for good.